wherever we look, there's a real sense of drift from those elected to lead us. Take relations with China. Now, I get that the government wants relations with the communist superpower to improve because while it's a security threat in our region, China is also Australia's biggest trading partner. But how dare the Chinese ambassador claim yesterday the pre-Christmas incident where a Chinese sonar injured Australian sailors was somehow Japan's fault just because there was a Japanese naval ship in the vicinity.
A third country boat nearby, whether or not there was sonar from the other side, other party, we're not sure.
Yeah, which country was that?
Japan.
Now, come on, mate. As the former Japanese ambassador Shingo Yamagami rightly tweeted, this is a classic example of evading responsibility. And why didn't we get a serious response from the Albanese government to the Chinese ambassador's earlier rebuke just because Australia had the temerity to congratulate the new Taiwanese president after a free and fair election in the only practically independent country that China now wants to swallow up?
On the question of Taiwan, there's no room at all for us to show flexibility or to make compromise because it involves China's sovereignty and territorial integrity.
And what's the federal government doing, giving Nauru $350 million a year to keep the immigration detention centre open there, yet taking no action when Nauru reportedly accepts $100 million a year from China to break relations with Taiwan and open them instead with Beijing because Nauru says they need money to run the centre. Labor's Minister for the Pacific, Pat Conroy, insisted the government was not blindsided by this, that in fact he had a heads up from the Nauruans.
This was a decision by the sovereign government of Nauru, and we respect their decision.
Was the Australian government taken by surprise by this announcement by Nauru?
No. I can be very clear that we were aware in advance of the announcement.
Now, if that's the case, why didn't the government make the point that every dollar gained from China, well, that would cost them $1 from Australia? Make Nauru understand there's a cost to Beijing's bribes. I mean, why just cop it when we're already, as I said, paying $350 million a year for a detention centre on Nauru that would be lucky to have 2 or 3 people even in it? Instead, all the PM could say in response to this new Chinese inroad in her own backyard was that this was a decision for them, as if we've got no influence and no sway over a micro-state that we've been keeping afloat for decades.
That's a decision for Nauru as a sovereign government. We respect decisions that they make.
Then there's Ukraine, fighting for its life, as we know, against the Russian dictator and standing up for the rights of small countries everywhere, but increasingly getting the cold shoulder from its fair weather friends. Now, it was revealed today that the Ukrainian military last month formally requested that Australia donate its retired Taipan helicopters to help Ukraine's medevac capability. When questioned about this, the Prime Minister blustered about how close he is to President Zelensky and how much Australia's already done.
We communicate very directly, including between myself and President Zelensky and the Ukrainian government. I've travelled to Ukraine to show very first-hand at the beginning or in the early stages of this conflict, and we stand with Ukraine and will continue to do so.
Just as the Prime Minister is telling listeners that, our own Defence Department was claiming that the Taipans were a safety risk, that they had become a liability. But if they were such dud choppers, what were they doing in our service for the whole of the past decade? And if they weren't that bad then, why have they been retired years before we're getting replacements, the Black Hawk medium-lift helicopters that haven't even yet arrived? Worse still, reports that rather than give these choppers to Ukraine, we're going to cut them up for spare parts and bury what's left in the ground. The discrepancy between what the Defence Minister Richard Marles says and what the Prime Minister's saying in public demonstrates they're not even on the same page. And in the issue of defence, that is a real worry. Or maybe it's that the PM's just not across the detail. Terribly, it's probably a bit of both. But this helicopter episode says as much about the state of our military capability and military procurement as it does about our timidity in helping our friends fight for freedom. Like the earlier episode where Ukraine wanted our Hawkeye armoured vehicles, and the government's then excuse to say no was it was a braking fault, as if a braking fault was a big issue to the Ukrainians compared to the Russians raining missiles down on them every day. Then there's the signs of an economic slowdown, like the sharp rise in the number of business failures. That data was out yesterday, confirming over 1,600 businesses have fallen into insolvency over the past 6 months. Concerns like the slowdown in job creation, like the sudden weakness in the stock market, and two, the rapid slowdown in China's economic growth. The worst results out this week in over 30 years. Now, for Australia, this matters because China's demand for our iron ore, coal and gas is what's kept us out of technical recession, especially coupled with the Albanese government's obvious reluctance to back new gas and coal mines. Well, that's where our continued prosperity is needed. Finally, yet more evidence of governmental lethargy and drift coming in the form of Labor's refusal today to intervene in the months-long dispute between the stevedoring company DP World and the very powerful and militant Maritime Union. It's all starting to impact our supply chains. Now, these port workers, I don't begrudge them the money, but they typically earn $130,000 a year, way above average earnings. So why Tony Burke should be so hands-off with their claim for an extra 16%? Well, it makes no sense at a time when the government says it's fighting inflation.
I've made clear to both groups today that I have no intention of intervening. The concept that where every other business in Australia is expected to negotiate with their workforce, but this business wants to rely on ministerial intervention, is not a view that impresses me.
Bugger the economic consequences, Tony Burke. And just like the Islamist hate preachers in your electorate that you refuse to call out, so too your union mates, you reckon, can do no wrong. When Parliament returns in February, we're going to see a Labor government under serious performance pressure. And the sooner that happens, the better for the economic and security damage gets any worse.